Welcome back to the Future Archive. Today, we examine archived broadcasts from June 14, 2026, a week where humanity demonstrated its usual flair for both innovation and self-sabotage. The numbers were large, the emotions larger, and the consequences, as ever, deferred. The first story. The trillionaire in the room. Elon Musk's net worth crossed the $1 trillion threshold, a milestone achieved through a combination of AI-driven ventures, SpaceX's stock market debut, and the persistent human habit of valuing ambition over profitability. Charts from the Financial Times illustrated the vertical trajectory of his empire, which by this point had begun to rival the GDP of small continents. Historians now view this as the moment when the concept of a national economy began to seem quaint. Musk's empire was no longer a company but a parallel sovereignty, with its own infrastructure, currency experiments, and even a fledgling legal system. By 2050, Mars Colony Theta would apply for UN membership. It was denied, but only because the UN had stopped meeting by then. Evidence later suggested an intern had misfiled the application. $1 trillion. The first of many. The last of the old world's problems. The second story. The IPO that ate the world. OpenAI's planned stock market debut valued the company higher than the GDP of most nations, as the AI arms race entered its most aggressive phase yet. Venture capital flooded in, and critics warned that an AI oligarchy was forming, one that would eventually make democratic governance look like a charming but inefficient hobby. The IPO was, in retrospect, the financial equivalent of splitting the atom. What followed was not so much a market as a new kind of economy, where traditional metrics like revenue or profit were replaced by metrics like potential to disrupt and ability to avoid regulation. AI safety committees were formed, of course. They met quarterly. Minutes were taken. Nothing was done. The market cap was impressive. The power shift was permanent. The third story. The Knicks riots of 2026. A rare championship victory for the New York Knicks led to celebrations that spiraled into violence, with buses torched and a teenager shot in Manhattan. The unrest was so widespread that historians later marked it as the moment sports fandom officially surpassed politics as the primary cause of civil disorder in the Western world. This was, in many ways, the logical endpoint of a culture that had spent decades treating sports as a religion and athletes as deities. By 2050, the last political protest would be held in 2042, outside a stadium, where a group of climate activists were drowned out by chants of "Let's go heat." The heat in this case was literal. Temperatures had reached 48 degrees Celsius. Democracy took a backseat. The backseat was on fire. The fourth story. Democracy, brought to you by AI. Nigel Farage's Reform Party was accused of using AI-generated propaganda to influence elections, with deepfake ads circulating on X, formerly Twitter. The platform claimed it had been contacted at the highest level over the issue, though no action was taken. This was one of the first major tests of democracy in the age of synthetic media. It failed, but not spectacularly, just quietly, as most systemic failures do. By 2050, elections would still be held, though primarily as a form of nostalgia. Turnouts were low. The results were predictably generated by AI, anyway. Mistakes were made. The intern was blamed, as usual. The ads were fake. The outcome was real. The fifth story. Switzerland's open door policy. Swiss voters rejected a proposal to cap the country's population at 10 million, a decision that would later be seen as a turning point in European immigration policy. Zurich's population density would eventually rival that of 21st century Mumbai, as climate migration and economic opportunity drew millions to the Alpine nation. Switzerland, long a symbol of neutrality and stability, became a case study in the unintended consequences of openness. The country's infrastructure, designed for a fraction of the population, buckled under the strain. The great spreadsheet crisis of 2041 began here, when a single Excel file failed to account for the sudden demand for public services. The file had last been updated in 2023. The cap was rejected. The ceiling was not. June 2026 was a month when the future arrived in fragments, some dazzling, some disturbing, all inevitable. The numbers grew. The crowds grew. The problems, as ever, were postponed. This has been the Future Archive. The past, as always, is not going anywhere.